Well, I mean, hopefully many people have been here right from the start. And we saw three medical professionals who've been on the front line. One who almost died from COVID, one who's treated thousands and thousands of people from COVID, another one who's also involved in the science and treating people. Why have we never heard those voices in 18 months in Singapore? Why has there never been a conversation about the fact that the vaccination is not a treatment? Where has been the conversation about treatment? And as was just asked, where has been the conversation about nutrition and healthcare? There are so many aspects of this that don't make any sense. And of course, now it's compounded by the mandates trying to push people into vaccination. And we heard some, terrible stories, people crying, what they've had to go through, the risk of family breakups, the worry about the children, the worry about their own health. And as Phyllis said, the government is supposed to be protecting us. Why are they doing this to the people? None of this makes any sense, which means that it just leaves down to us. We have to try and make sense of it, because if we're getting a one-sided story, if we're getting one-sided so-called science and experts, how are we going to ever make up our minds as to what is right and what is right and what is wrong? How are we going to make informed choices? How can we trust that we are being given the right information? Because as we've seen over 18 months, every goalpost has changed, every promise has changed, everything we've been told has changed. Along the way, and I want to specifically go to one point where one lady was saying, I think it was Michelle was saying, when you go to the school, you have to sign a letter to say that you are responsible. And yet the government said to Pfizer and Moderna, no responsibility for you. They've said to our medical profession, no responsibility for you. The government themselves, no responsibility for them. They created the VFAP scheme, which has been virtually impossible for anyone to claim. But for those people they're pushing into taking the vaccine, you have to take all the responsibility for your own health if you take this experimental vaccine. That breaks so many moral and ethical rules. And I think it breaks a whole range of our laws and our constitution. I mean, there are so many things that are wrong about this. And it's all been summed up in all of these messages we've heard today, but especially what we heard at the start. These are medical professionals on the front line with direct experience. They know what to do. They're not just reading from textbooks or papers that were written by people who may have bias or a vested interest. They're there on the front line dealing with patients, saving lives. They know what works. They know what doesn't work. They also know, as was clearly demonstrated, the vaccine does not do the basic thing a vaccine is supposed to do, which is to stop the catching and transmission of the disease, which brings it down to a personal treatment. If it's a personal treatment, how does it have any mass effect on anyone? How does it help society at all? And then we've got one excuse was being given recently, hospital overload. Well, first of all, I'd like to know, why do we only have 200 ICU beds in Singapore with a population of 5.6 million people? That seems to be that we are massively underprovided for, which is obviously another question that I hope someone asks. But even then, who is in those hospital beds? Because as we heard from another person, the numbers keep changing. So we don't know. Are they really unvaccinated people who are getting sick with COVID and going to hospital? Or are they elderly people who are already in hospital with some other condition who get diagnosed with COVID while they're there? And are the new patients coming in vaccinated people who are getting sick and having to go to hospital because they're on this home protocol, go home and wait and see whether it gets worse? And as we heard from Dr. Chetty, day 8 seems to be the critical day. So we've now got, what, 20,000 people on home recovery. How many of those 20,000 on day 8 are going to have a bad reaction and go back to hospital? And the ones who are all being sent home are the vaccinated ones. So do we actually have a crisis of vaccinated people taking up our healthcare because we're not doing early intervention and early treatment? You see, there are so many questions here. There are so many things that don't make sense. and we're having no proper debate about it. We're having no conversations. The politics on it has been shut down. Anyone who makes mention of it, they get attacked in one form or another. Generally, if people are attacked, that means that you have no argument, that your own position can't stand up. That should concern us all as well, even more. There are so many of these issues that we really need to propagate out to everyone and get them to think about. Because the other thing is, and it was also hinted in one of the statements today, and it's been great, all of the speakers we've had, what constitutes a vaccinated person or an unvaccinated person? At the moment, it's me and many of the people on this panel who have not taken a vaccine at this point in time. But very soon, as we've seen mentioned by various health authorities and has already been implemented in Israel, not of having had the booster will constitute you being unvaccinated. Then all of those people that for whatever reason are very concerned about the booster and the fact that they've watched the numbers around the world parallel the vaccination rate with infection rate and death rate may rightly be questioning and going, maybe I shouldn't have this booster. Well, then they're suddenly in the boat of the people who are currently considered unvaccinated. And if that only lasts 6 months, does that mean by the end of next year, the fourth one is the shot? And if you haven't had 4, you don't count as vaccinated. It's just an ever moving target, which if collectively vaccinated people and unvaccinated people don't stand up and push back on, could lead us into a very dangerous place. And the last point I want to make is this whole thing about we have to vaccinate for going to the office on the 1st of January. We're in a fast moving situation. It's changing daily. They're reevaluating their position week by week. How can they know what will be the needs or the condition be on January the 1st, which is over 2 months away? There is no way that that decision to say you need to have a vaccine on January the 1st can be predicated on any kind of medical emergency. That is purely an administrative rule to force people into vaccination now. Why are they doing that? It makes absolutely no sense, because in 2 months' time, COVID may be gone. So why are you forcing people to take an experimental vaccine in November for something that may not be required in January? So every little step of the way, we don't get the right information. Anyone who asks questions gets attacked. Medical professionals around the world aren't being listened to. We seem to be following all the worst examples like Israel, and we're not following some of the best examples like the ones we heard today in South Africa and the ones that we heard out of Uttar Pradesh in India and other parts of the world. There are plenty of examples of what works: repurposing existing medication, early intervention, taking responsibility for your own health and managing it in the early phases as though you had a flu. But in advance of that, doing things in your lifestyle that improves your immune system, eating right, sleeping right, getting exercise, all of these things, none of that yet is being discussed. So I hope that someone somewhere in authority can hear the voices here today, hear the pain in people's minds, hear the fact that they're appealing and saying, you're supposed to be here protecting the people of Singapore, not dividing them, not attacking them, not putting them under stress, but protecting them. And you do that by looking at the best solutions in the world and then coming up with one that works for Singapore and not following anyone else's agenda with only one choice: vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. That makes no sense whatsoever to anyone. And everyone, whether you're currently vaccinated or unvaccinated, should be seriously worried about that, because we do not know where it's going to end. If we don't speak now, who is going to speak in the future? Thank you.
Thank you so